On the night of August 15th, 1944, German radar operators along the French Riviera suddenly lit up with panic. Dozens, no hundreds of pings echoed off the Mediterranean, many of them enormous, unmistakably warships, headed straight for the beaches between Ciotat and Cannes. Intercepted Allied radio confirmed their worst fears. This was it. The second D-Day was tonight. German units scrambled. Coastal defense came alive. What remained of the Kriegsmarine surged toward the threat, desperate to meet the Allied armada before it reached shore. Then, through the dark, 2 German corvettes made visual contact and paused. The silhouettes were like nothing in the manuals. They were massive, round like an orange, and... wait, are they floating in the air? Douglas Fairbanks Jr. had everything. At 33, he earned a whopping $100,000 per picture, a fortune when most Americans lived comfortably on $25 a week. His face graced magazine covers from Hollywood to Hong Kong. He shared the screen with Greta Garbo, married Joan Crawford, and counted British royalty among his drinking companions. His father, the original swashbuckler, had conquered Hollywood, playing Zorro and Robin Hood in the golden silent age of American cinema. The son followed suit, sword-fighting his way through the prisoner of Zenda and Gunga Din. He could have spent the war selling bonds, posing for photos, entertaining troops far from any U-boat or Luftwaffe bomber. Instead, in October 1941, Fairbanks walked into a Navy recruitment office. The problem was that the Navy didn't like him or his superstar status. Fairbanks remembers, quote, "Getting a Naval Reserve Commission meant one had to have a university degree, and I had no such thing. But Hollywood royalty had its privileges. Strings were pulled. A correspondence course materialized. Within weeks, Lieutenant Junior Grade Fairbanks found himself dining at the White House with Franklin Roosevelt himself. FDR joked over brandy, quote, "I'll make you captain of the head," referring to the toilet. The president, a former assistant secretary of the Navy, found the whole thing amusing, a movie star playing sailor. The Navy brass didn't. Once he was in, a lieutenant commander sneered at him, quote, "Listen here, Fairbanks, the quickest way for you to be a seagoing deck officer is to go to sea, not to parade around Washington in that uniform." That stung. Fairbanks felt no stranger to seafaring, having grown up around boats and sea travel. The truth was, his nautical experience consisted mainly of yacht parties off Catalina Island. By March 1942, Fairbanks was at sea. The North Atlantic heaved with 40-foot swells as Fairbanks, green-faced and gripping the rail, crossed aboard USS Augusta as Flag Lieutenant to Rear Admiral Robert Ike Giffen. The Admiral saw through the celebrity veneer, but recognized something else: ambition. He dispatched Fairbanks on increasingly dangerous assignments. First, aboard the carrier USS Wasp, racing through U-boat-infested waters to deliver desperately needed Spitfires to besiege Malta. Then to the heavy cruiser USS Wichita, screening convoy PQ-17 bound for Russia. On July 4th, 1942, the Luftwaffe found them in the Barents Sea. Fairbanks watched helplessly from Wichita's bridge as German bombers systematically destroyed the convoy he was supposed to protect. There was nothing to do. London had sent orders to scatter, and it was every ship for itself. 24 merchant ships out of 35 went to the bottom. Thousands of men, millions of tons of supplies meant for Stalin's armies, gone. Fairbanks had wanted adventure, wanted to prove that his talents went beyond memorizing lines and stage fighting. Fairbanks couldn't shake the image of PQ-17's burning wrecks. Now he wanted a chance to hit back at the Germans. He fired off a letter to Lord Louis Mountbatten, Dickie, as Fairbanks knew him from pre-war parties, who now ran Britain's combined operations, Churchill's commandos. The aristocrat who'd once waltzed with Fairbanks at London galas now orchestrated raids across French beaches. Within weeks, Fairbanks found himself at HMS Tormentor on the Isle of Wight. The name wasn't coincidental. British commandos trained the most ruthless, brutal men the Allies had to offer. Live fire exercises, hand-to-hand combat with knives. Then north to Auchnacarry Castle in Scotland, where veterans of Dunkirk and Dieppe taught him to move silently and think outside the box. Fairbanks remembered a sergeant telling him, quote, "Forget everything the Navy taught you. Wars aren't won by bigger guns. They're won by making the enemy look the wrong way." The commandos specialized in what they called pajama raids, nighttime channel crossings in fast boats, hitting German outposts, spreading chaos and vanishing before dawn. Fairbanks joined 3 raids. On the 2nd, he watched British commandos project sounds of tank engines through hidden speakers, convincing an entire German battalion that panzers were flanking them. The Germans retreated from positions they'd held for months. The actor in Fairbanks suddenly felt at home. This went beyond warfare. It was theater. November 1942. Back in Norfolk, Fairbanks cornered Vice Admiral H. Kent Hewitt with an idea that sounded insane. Let him build an American deception unit. Small boats, big speakers, radar-reflecting balloons. Make the Germans think invasions were coming where they weren't. Hewitt should have laughed him out. Instead, the Admiral listened. Sicily was coming. Italy after that. Eventually, France. Every invasion would cost American boys on the beaches. If deception could make even one German division guard the wrong stretch of sand. He barked, quote, "Write it up. I'll get you to Washington." In the capital, Fairbanks faced Admiral Ernest J. King, the one man who could make it happen. King had a reputation for eating lieutenants for breakfast, but Fairbanks had learned from the best actors in the world. He pitched the idea like his life depended on it. March 5th, 1943. King's authorization came through. Recruit 180 officers and 300 enlisted men for a unit that didn't officially exist. Now Fairbanks needed someone who could make speakers roar like invasion fleets. He found Harold Burris Meyer, 39, a theatrical sound pioneer who had engineered the stereo magic for Disney's Fantasia. The professor had once made Broadway audiences believe ghosts were moving across the stage. His new mission: use sonic deception to, quote, "scare the bejesus out of the enemy." The recruitment ads for this unique group of commandos were deliberately vague, quote, "The Navy is requesting volunteers for prolonged, hazardous, distant duty for a secret project. Requirements: no seasickness, experience in small boat handling, enough electrical knowledge to fix a home radio, and at least fundamental knowledge of celestial navigation." May 25th, 1943. Beach Jumper Unit 1 was born at Camp Bradford. Fairbanks had his actors. Burris Meyer had his stage. It was time to take the show on the road. June 1943. BJU-1 scrambled into trucks, raced to Newport News, and boarded transports for Iran. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, was on. Ready or not, the beach jumpers were going to war. Bob Rainey, 22, a radio man from Chicago, had spent weeks perfecting his invasion soundtrack. Quote, "I created the effects by recording boat engines, boats' whistles, tank engines from a nearby army training site, and even anchor chain sounds by pulling a chain over the edge of an old bucket." Crammed with his equipment into a 63-foot air-sea rescue boat, he wondered if the Germans would buy the performance. They arrived at Ferryville, Tunisia. Their new base was a French colonial dump with tents, mud, and, quote, "wharf rats the size of cats." Worse was the welcome gift. Each man received a wooden crate for personal effects, pre-addressed to next of kin. Navy brass expected huge losses. Maybe 50%, maybe more. The air-sea rescue boats, or ASRs, looked like toys compared to proper warships. Plywood hulls, 4 twin 50-caliber machine guns, and some 3.5-inch barrage rockets. Their secret weapon weighed 800 pounds. Burris Meyer's sound equipment, generators, amplifiers, and speakers that could throw an invasion's roar 3 miles. On July 10th, 1943, came D-Day for Sicily. BJU-1's mission was to make the Germans believe the invasion was hitting Cape San Marco, 100 miles west of the actual landing zones. 12 ASRs headed out in mountainous seas. Waves crashed over bows. Men vomited. Equipment broke loose. They turned back halfway there, their first mission a bust. Boats were dragged from their objective, and some were lost for hours. Wartime theater was harder than they thought. On July 11th, they got a second chance. The sea was calm, and they were shrouded by total darkness. At 10 p.m., 3 miles off Cape San Marco, they began the show. 3 ASRs cranked up Burris Meyer's heaters, blasting sounds of landing craft engines, anchor chains rattling, officers shouting commands. A 4th ASR raced ahead, laying thick smoke. Other ships deployed massive radar-reflecting balloons that would make any radar operator gasp in horror. The Germans bought it. Searchlights blazed to life, sweeping the water. Then the shore batteries opened up. 6-inch guns, machine guns, everything they had. Shells screamed overhead, splashing in patterns around the tiny boats. Bob Rainey watched a searchlight lock onto his boat. The beam was blinding, perfect for German gunners. Quote, "I loaded a Garand and shot it out," he recalled. One shot. Darkness returned. At 11 p.m., the order to close the beach came. The ASRs spun toward shore, guns blazing. They wanted the Germans to see them, to believe the invasion was real. At 500 yards, they pivoted hard and ran, leaving chaos in their wake. But Fairbanks, watching from Admiral Hewitt's flagship, wasn't done. The British air diversion had been scrubbed. He saw an opening. He urged Hewitt, quote, "Give me everything that floats. Let's really sell this." At midnight, 11 ASRs and 8 PT boats split into 2 groups, hitting the coast between Mazzara del Vallo and Granitola. This time, the Germans were ready. Radar-controlled guns found them immediately. Shells walked across the water with terrifying precision. The beach jumpers threw everything at the coast. Sound, smoke, radar-reflecting balloons, fake radio chatter, rockets, and gunfire. The night exploded into manufactured chaos. It worked. An entire German reserve division, convinced the invasion was real, stayed frozen in western Sicily, while Allied forces poured ashore in the south and east. The beach jumpers had drawn first blood and lived to tell about it. On September 7, 1943, in Palermo, Sicily, Fairbanks faced his audience: destroyer captains, PT boat cowboys, OSS spooks, and 50 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne, who looked like they'd been eating razor wire for breakfast. Fairbanks announced, flashing his movie star grin, quote, "Gentlemen, we're going to play a real game of pirates, capturing islands." Even John Steinbeck, the novelist turned war correspondent, looked up from his notebook. This was insane. Operation Avalanche, the invasion of Salerno, needed its flanks secured. That meant taking the islands, controlling the Gulf of Gaeta and the Bay of Naples. Fairbanks had convinced Admiral Hewitt to let him lead the mission. His force was made of the destroyer USS Knight, the Dutch gunboat Flores, 4 subchasers, 20 PT boats, and those crazy paratroopers. On September 8th, Ventotene Island materialized through the morning haze, 180 miles from Palermo. Fairbanks ordered smokescreens laid. Through the destroyer's speakers, his voice boomed across the water in Italian, quote, "Surrender, or face devastating shelling and massive invasion." The island held 50 Italian militia and 90 Germans. The Italians had had enough of Mussolini's war. The Germans hadn't. Fairbanks checked his Tommy gun and turned to his landing party, ordering them to follow him. The actor who'd played pirates was about to become one. He led the charge into Ventotene Harbor aboard a single ASR, spray soaking his uniform. Thompson's submachine gun at the ready. Behind him, a handful of sailors and OSS agents gripped their weapons. The Italian militia surrendered before Fairbanks's boots hit the dock. Weapons clattered to the ground. White flags appeared from windows. But the Germans had fled inland, digging into the island's rocky spine for a last stand. Fairbanks needed them gone. He huddled with the OSS agents and improvised. He ordered the paratroopers, which Steinbeck later described as, quote, "a hard, ragged, and trigger-happy crew," to lead the way. At the same time, he ordered the destroyer to give him 4 rounds and make them count. Knight's 5-inch guns roared. Shells exploded on the hillsides, not particularly close to the Germans, but close enough. The paratroopers advanced, weapons ready. The bluff worked. 90 Germans, convinced they faced annihilation from naval bombardment and savage American paratroopers, emerged with hands raised. 1 island down. But Fairbanks was just warming up. Over the next 10 days, his pirate fleet swept through the Italian islands like something from his father's movies. The Pontine Islands fell, then 5 more near Naples. The Crown Jewel, Capri, playground of Roman emperors, taken without firing a shot. Each island followed the pattern. Smoke, sonic deception, Fairbanks' voice promising destruction in Italian, a Tommy gun-wielding movie star leading the charge. Confused defenders surrendered to what seemed like an overwhelming force. It was outrageous. It was pure cinema. By September 18th, when the task force finally dissolved, Fairbanks had captured 7 islands with low numbers of casualties that were unheard of in the war. The actor had become the role, but the biggest performance still lay ahead. On August 14th, 1944, the Mediterranean was black glass, calm and quiet. Operation Dragoon, the all-out invasion of southern France, was launched in hours. This time, the beach jumpers faced their most ambitious deception yet. Convinced the Germans that 500,000 Allied troops could land anywhere along 300 miles of coast. Fairbanks split his force, eastern diversion, western diversion. 2 phantom invasions to shield the real one. He took command aboard HMS Aphis, a British gunboat that crawled through water at 12 knots. Somewhere out there, German corvettes patrolled the coast at twice that speed. By 2 a.m., the Western Group began their performance. Bob Rainey, hunched over his radio equipment in a PT boat, poured out, quote, all kinds of commands and other information by voice. His team had created an electronic mirage, an 8 by 10 mile invasion convoy that existed only in German radar screens and radio intercepts. To anyone actually there, the invasion force was nothing more than tiny boats leashed to ridiculously silly balloons. At 3, the real invasion force hit the beaches between Nice and Saint-Tropez. Now, the beach jumpers had to keep German reserves locked in place, convinced the phantom invasions were real. Then everything went wrong. The ASR charging toward Ciotat Bay hit heavy fog. Blind, scattered. The beach jumpers' precise choreography dissolved into chaos. Boats nearly rammed each other. Some sailed too deep into the bay. Others lost their bearings completely. German shore batteries, alerted now, waited in the murk. Dawn brought no relief. Just news that half the French commandos on Dufresne had stumbled into a minefield, blown to pieces. But Fairbanks couldn't abort, not with the main invasion hanging in the balance. 2 days later, at 2 a.m., he was back in La Ciotat. This time, they brought everything. Aphis and her sister Scarab lobbed 6-inch shells at pre-selected targets. PT boats and ASRs from both diversion groups screamed into the bay, smoke generators pumping, rockets shrieking, every gun blazing. They scattered delayed TNT charges that would explode long after they had fled, maintaining the illusion. Fairbanks watched from Aphis's bridge. He wrote, quote, the whole area lit up. Star shells roared in the sky. Searchlights flashed along the coast. 20 and 40 millimeter shells flew in all directions, followed by huge flashes from 88, 105, and 240 millimeter near misses. The Germans were throwing everything at them, but they were looking the wrong way. The deception was working. Then, the radar called out 2 contacts, fast movers, closing. German corvettes. Real warships with real guns. Rapid fire, radar controlled, designed to shred plywood boats. The hunters had found the beach jumpers. Fairbanks felt his mouth go dry. His gunboats could make 12 knots on a good day. The corvettes were doing 24 and accelerating. The fog that had nearly destroyed them now became their only shield. But it was lifting. Soon, the Germans would see exactly what they were hunting. Not an invasion fleet, but a handful of wooden boats, balloons, and obsolete gunboats. To make matters worse, Aphis's gunnery officer suddenly shouted, quote, guns overheating. We need to cease fire. Fairbanks watched the corvettes boring in. His 6-inchers, the only weapons that might scratch German armor, were down. Scarab was taking near misses, 4-inch waterspouts, and walking closer. Her compass spun wildly. Radio gone. Radar blank. He had to improvise. He immediately ordered all small vessels to lay smoke in the area. ASRs and PT boats spun like water bugs, generators belching thick white clouds. But smoke couldn't hide them long, not from radar-controlled guns. Fairbanks made a choice that would have failed any Naval Academy exam. He turned to fight. Aphis and Scarab, making 12 knots, swung toward the enemy. Then the smoke parted, and by mere chance, Aphis and Scarab emerged in perfect position. They crossed the enemy's T. It was the holy grail of naval combat. The German corvettes, racing in column formation, could only fire their forward guns. But Aphis and Scarab could bring every weapon to bear on the lead ship's vulnerable broadside. The first salvo smashed into the lead corvette's hull. The German ship staggered, slowed, and began listing. But the second corvette was already adjusting, bringing its guns around. Shells splashed closer to Scarab. This luck couldn't last. Then salvation roared out of the dawn. USS Endicott, destroyer, coming hard, her 5-inch guns blazing. The cavalry had arrived. The second corvette tried to run. Endicott shells found it anyway. The explosion lit up the morning sky like a second sunrise. The corvette came apart, burning. Suddenly, impossibly, it was over. There was only burning wreckage and men in the water. German sailors screaming for help. Fairbanks didn't hesitate. His beach jumpers were now to rescue those they had just sent to the water. Bob Rainey spent 3 hours on his PT boat's bow with a heaving line. Quote, "I spent from 9 till noon pulling in German survivors." But that was war. You did what you had to. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you save the people trying to kill you. The beach jumpers would continue serving through Korea and Vietnam, evolving into the Navy's Information Operations Command. Their deceptions would become electronic, digital, but the principle Fairbanks proved remained. War is theater, and the best show wins. Fairbanks returned to Hollywood after the war, but he never recaptured his pre-war stardom. Maybe because he'd found something more real than anything movies could offer. His language would help draft the Potsdam Declaration. His innovations would reshape naval warfare. Asked in 1993 how he ranked his military service against his extraordinary Hollywood life, the old actor didn't hesitate. Quote, very high indeed. He'd spent his youth pretending to be a hero. He'd spent the war becoming one.